Let's get rolling here. Okay, welcome everybody. This week's Parsha is Ki Seitzei. We are running towards the finish line. A couple more Parshos. We'll be done the Torah. We'll be ready to make a party on Simchas Torah. So there's a lot to cover in Ki Seitzei, as there always is. I pretty much say this every week. And we're going to go through some of the main points of the Parsha, and we'll focus on 2 or 3 areas that I found particularly fascinating and relevant. So the first one is right in the beginning. There's this very unusual, fascinating concept. And that is right in the beginning of the Parsha, chapter 21, verse 10, Ki seitzei l'malchem alavecha, nesanei Hashem l'kecha b'yadcha, v'ra'isa b'shviya eshes yifas toar, v'chashakta ba. So when you're going out to war against your enemies, and Hashem will deliver the enemies into your hand, there's this concept that one of the Jewish soldiers might see a non-Jewish woman, from the enemy nation, and have a desire to be with her, to have relations with her. And normally that's forbidden, as any kind of relationship between a Jew and a non-Jew is forbidden. But the Torah gives a kind of process that this soldier could go through. And ultimately, if he makes it to the end of the process, which apparently was very unusual, but nevertheless, he would have the ability to actually marry her. So what is that process? Basically, that process is that he needs to push off the act. He's not going to just go home and have relations with her. That's going to be forbidden. He has to put her through this whole process. So in the beginning, she might have seemed very attractive to him and beautiful, but once he brings her home and he puts her through this process, you put her in her house, you shave her head, you let her nails grow, and then you put on different types of clothes, and she's basically going to be there for a month or a certain amount of time. She's going to be crying for her parents. It's going to be terrible. It's not going to end up. It's likely not going to end up that this marriage will actually end up happening at all. But it's a very unusual concept because you have something that's forbidden in the Torah that the Torah is giving a way to permit. Even if it's the most unlikely, far-fetched idea, it's still a very fascinating concept. Okay, so there's commentaries that talk about this. It seems to be that the Torah is just working with human nature, that in the heat of the stress and the environment of war, a Jewish soldier won't be able to control himself, and therefore we under this circumstance, the Torah is going to kind of give in. It's very unusual. It's very unusual. So Rashi explains that the Torah says after this whole process, "V'haya im lo chafatzta ba v'shlachta l'nasha." If it will be that at the end he does not desire her, then he's required to send her off, to freedom with peace, etc. And Rashi says this is not the Torah saying maybe he won't end up wanting to marry her. It's the Torah saying that's what's going to happen. The Torah is predicting that this soldier is going to lose interest and set her free. So this doesn't seem all that relevant to us. It's very unusual. We're certainly not going to be in this circumstance of fighting a Jewish war, and coming through this whole idea. So what could the general public learn from this? What could we all learn from this highly unusual topic in the Torah? So I think there's 2 things I took out of this. 2 things we could learn from this story. And that is strategies that the Torah is teaching us to push away our Yetzer Hara, because that's basically what happened here. Okay, if we don't get caught up in the details of this, let's zoom out a little bit. What happened here? A man had a desire to do a forbidden act. The Torah told him, try this, do this, do this, do this. And then the Torah predicts that he's going to lose interest in that, and that he's not going to go through with something that the Torah doesn't really want him to go through with. So there's strategy here. There's strategy here. The Torah is giving some kind of strategy, which we could hopefully use on a much more general level, for men and for women. We're not fighting a war. We live in 2022, add that all together. And I think there's some very powerful ideas here. So if we try to analyze, what is it that made this soldier lose his interest for this girl, for this enemy girl? So I think there's 2 things that contribute to it. I think there's two things that contribute to that. One of them is that the soldier was encouraged by the process of the Torah to distance himself from, essentially from the battlefield, meaning to distance himself from the ability to do that Avera immediately. So instead of this soldier having a chance to just go home and do the Avera, he's being told, no, go off the battlefield, bring her home, put her through this whole thing. And then the other factor here is time. He's being told to wait a month. So I think these are two strategies that we can all use in fighting our Yetzer Hara. The first idea is distancing ourselves from the battlefield. So when the Yetzer Hara comes to us and tells us, trying to encourage us to do something, and of course we're way more broad than forbidden relations here. We're talking much more broader, any concept in the Torah. So one strategy is to push away the battlefield. We don't want to fight the Yetzer Hara head on, because that's very often a battle that is lost. In the case of the soldier, the high stress environment of a battlefield is not a good place, does not bode well for this soldier to try to control his desires. That's not a good place to do that. Okay, so let's move away. Let's move home. Let's change the environment. So I think that applies to our Yetzer Hara as well. Getting off the battlefield means to avoid a head-on collision with the Yetzer Hara. When he tries to get us to do something and we just need to tell ourselves, no, 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 and he says, yeah, very often we're not going to fight that war. But if we start using side tactics, we start pushing things away, we try finding other ways to set ourselves up for success, I think we'll have a much better chance of doing that. So like, for example, if somebody's trying to go on a diet or watch their eating habits, the head-on approach would be to have a house stocked with the most delicious junk food you could possibly think of. And then for the person to say to themselves, I will control myself. I am not going to do this. This is not for me. I'm better than that. I need to eat healthier. I need to lose weight, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm going to avoid that. But that's a direct battle, so to speak. That's a direct battle. If instead of just trying to tell himself no, he would, let's say, purge his house of all the junk food, he'll have a much better chance at winning that battle. He's pushed that battlefield away. It's not just yes, no, yes, no. It's okay. Now you already cleared your house. Now it's actually much harder to go ahead and do that up there. Now it involves a trip to Walmart or Target or Winn-Dixie first before you could manage to slip in that area. So that's one component of it. And the second component of it is time. Push it off. Push it off. Even if we think in our minds that we're going to fall for this, the Yetzer Hara is trying to get us to do something, we're going to do that sin. Try to wait even a little bit of time. Here, the Torah is actually encouraging a lot of time. 30 days is a huge amount of time. But if we're going to take a lesson out of here, if we give it a few minutes, if we give it a little bit of time, we have a much better chance at ultimately winning that fight. After the heat of that desire wears off a little bit, we have a much, much better chance of doing that. We have a temptation to say something nasty, to send out, a text message that's not so nice, to make some kind of comment to somebody, or to do any kind of other sin, or eat something that doesn't have a good kosher symbol, or do some kind of desecration of Shabbos. If we had a tactic that just involved, I'll do it, but I'm going to wait 5 minutes, we'd have a much, much better chance at ultimately winning that fight. And I think that is a very, very important lesson that we're learning here from this Eshes Yifas Torah, that the Torah is saying, push it off a little bit. And by pushing it off a little bit, I think there's a much bigger chance that we're not going to end up getting back to it at all. So that's the lesson I see from this. 2 strategies that we have. One, get off the battlefield, try to change the environment, make it a less direct confrontation against the Yetzer Hara. And the second idea is to give it a little bit of time. Yes, Mr. Yetzer Hara, I'll do that Avera. I'll fall for that, no problem, but I'm going to do it in 5 minutes. I'm going to do it in 10 minutes. I'll do it in maybe even 30 seconds. And that gives us a little time to cool off from the heat of the moment and hopefully have a better chance at winning that fight. Okay, that's idea number 1. Any thoughts on that? Okay, now there's so much more in this parsha. So much more in this parsha. I wish we had micro parshas. We had each week, only like 1/7 of the parsha. We'd be able to actually get through a nice amount of it. But yeah, a lot here. All right. So after that, there's bullet pointing through. There's tons and tons of mitzvahs in this parsha. I'm not reading every single one of them. One of them that I thought was an interesting point that I saw, that sometimes in the times of the Torah, when we had a Jewish court and we had a Beis Din, then there was the ability for Beis Din to put someone to death for various reasons. It wasn't very likely at all. The Talmud says, that it was extremely, extremely rare that a Beis Din actually put somebody to death. But the point is that sometimes it did happen under the right criteria. The guy was warned, or lady, or whatever. And the Torah says that if a man, here it's chapter 21, verse 22, if a man shall have committed a sin whose judgment is death, he shall be put to death. And here it says you should hang him on the gallows. That's not always the case. There's different forms of punishment. But then the Torah says, in this case, his body shall not remain for the night on the gallows. Rather, you should surely bury him on that day. For a hanging person is a curse of God. You shall not contaminate your land, which Hashem, your God, gives you as an inheritance. And I saw one of the commentators say, just like a small insight to point out of this, is that when the Torah, it's clear that the Torah has respect and dignity and gives honor to every single Jew, even one who has committed such a terrible sin in the times of the temple, that they're actually going to be put to death. Still, we have to have the ultimate level of respect for their body, and we can't leave it hanging. It can't be shamed. It can't be dealt with in any kind of disrespectful way. And what's the reason for that? Because the death penalty was an atonement for the person's sin. And in the big picture of his neshama, this cycle that he went through, this human body, isn't the end of it. This is only just one step in the neshama's journey through this world. And that didn't end well. Well, the death penalty was a kapara, was an atonement for his sin. So once he's done that, we're not shaming him. We're not mad at him. Beis Din doesn't kill him out of anger, like, oh, you're such a terrible person, we have to kill you. It's a protocol that Hashem gave in order for us to be able to have an atonement. People are not, Jews are not intrinsically wrong or evil by doing sins. They just need to find a way to atone for it when they do sins. I think it's just a fascinating idea about the respect that Hashem has for the body. What's on your mind, Cliff?
I want to ask you a very quick question. I didn't know a Beis Din could sentence a person to death. I thought that was the Sanhedrin. I thought a Beis Din just resolved conflict.
Yeah, maybe it was the Sanhedrin. I didn't mean that term literally. Yeah, it was one court that was able to.
Got it.
Yeah. Yeah, not every court had the ability to. That is correct. Okay. Now there's a lot more. There's talk about returning a lost item, which we're actually going to get to. There's talk about building. There's a lot of building a fence around a roof, like basically being safe. If a person builds a flat roof that somebody could access, he has a mitzvah to put a fence around it so that people don't get hurt. The mitzvah of tzitzis. There's a lot of talk about various forms of adultery and forbidden marriages and relationships, and our requirement to stay holy when it comes to our relationships. And then there's a lot of bein adam l'chavera also. There's ideas, of how we treat one another. Hashem doesn't want Jews, charging each other interest. Workers have a right to eat. That means if somebody's working in your field, on your farm, let's say, they're allowed to eat from your farm while they're working. They're working, and it's all you could eat apples for them that day, or whatever it may be. You can't say, no, you can't touch any of my produce. Now, they're not allowed to fill up their bags and take them home. That would be stealing. But at least to the extent of, them munching a little bit on the job, you have to give them that. And then there's different, kind of underprivileged demographics in one way or another, people who are struggling in one way or another. There's a lot of mitzvahs about how we treat them. Somebody who owes you money, who's indebted to you, there's halachos of how you're supposed to treat them. You're not even supposed to approach them on the street if you owe them money. There's an idea that if you are walking down the street and you're walking towards somebody who owes you money, you should cross the street. You shouldn't even pass him by so as not to make him feel bad. That's how sensitive the Torah demands that we be. And there's how you treat your workers. There's how you treat orphans and widows and the poor. The penalty for embarrassing people, a little bit of talk about that, being honest in measurements and weights when you're, in business. So there's really a huge amount of it there. So let's focus on two things, and that will be our main focus for today. So we're talking about all this bein adam l'chaver, all these ideas of how we treat one another. And one of the ideas, which really is technically in last week's Torah portion, but I didn't have time to get to it last week, and I think it fits well just into the theme of all these mitzvahs of how we treat each other. So the pasuk says, "B'tzedek tishbot am yisecha," and with righteousness you shall judge your nation. And the literal understanding of that is talking about judges, Jewish judges in Parshas Shoftim. A judge needs to judge people in a very righteous way, not be swayed by one of the parties, not be swayed by somebody who has, political power or a position or a rabbi or a mafia boss, you name it. There's nothing that should sway a judge's perspective on judging this case righteously. But the commentators learned from this that this is also a lesson to every single person. But tzedek tishbot am yisecha means every person should judge one another favorably. Every single Jew should judge their nation, am yisecha, your nation, your brothers and sisters, favorably. And that is such an important mitzvah in how we treat one another. Judging favorably is the root solution, I guess I'll say, of the issue of Lashon Hara. So Lashon Hara is when we're talking negatively about people. It is really hard to work on Lashon Hara. Okay, if you find it easy, please let me know what your tactics are. But just to work on not speaking negatively about people is a difficult process. It's one that requires commitment, and you have to, it has to be something that's on your mind that you're conscious about. But I think that if we would judge each other favorably, we wouldn't ever even get to the issue of Lashon Hara. We won't be tempted to say something bad about somebody if we only view people positively. If we judge people favorably, if we look at somebody and they're doing something that we see as wrong, and we find a way to judge them favorably, that's going to be a person that's going to be a lot easier to avoid saying Lashon Hara about. So that's a really, really important mitzvah, really important to try to judge people favorably. And there's a lot of, ideas of this to share, but I want to share one idea here. So Chazal say, the Mishnah says in Avos, say, basic idea of b'tzedek tishbot am yisecha v'havidonis kol adam l'chaf schus. You might have heard this, before. Judge every person favorably. So how do we judge people favorably? So I heard this idea from Rabbi Menashe Uhr, a big, amazing rabbi in Israel that I like to listen to a lot. He says, sometimes you judge people and you're judging them favorably, but in your heart, deep in your heart, you feel that they're guilty. You feel that they're guilty. When the Torah says, "B'tzedek tishbot am yisecha," judge them with righteousness, the Torah is telling you that you should really feel that this is righteousness. You're not covering it up. You're not being cute here. You're looking at somebody, they're doing something terrible, and now you're saying, "Oh, it's all good," but really you feel it's terrible. We need to bring ourselves to a place where we truly feel that what that person is doing is not a terrible act. There's a lot to talk about this, but I saw the Panovich Rav said an interesting idea. He says Hashem created everything. He quotes, I think it's in Mishlei. I forgot the Hebrew of it, but basically the English pasuk, this verse says everything Hashem created is for His honor. That means everything in this world could be used for service of Hashem. So the Panovich Rav asks, why did Hashem create? I'll tell you his Yiddish expression, krummer svaras. Krummer svara means twisted logic. Okay, some people have twisted logic. Some people say, illogical, irrational, crazy things. That's just a reality, right? So if in Mishlei it says that every single thing in this world could be used for service of Hashem, why did Hashem create the concept that somebody could be so ridiculous in their logic and have like twisted logic? He said the reason is is to explain to yourself, to justify to yourself a Jew who's doing something wrong. You see a Jew is something wrong, you should use twisted, innovative ideas to try to explain to yourself why it's not really that bad. Okay, so now it's hard to do this, but I want to tell you a story that brings out the fact that this needs to be done. There's so many times that we could be judging favorably and it just seems impossible. So we just write it off as totally impossible. And then sometimes you might hear the end of the story and realize how wrong we actually were. So I heard a story about a Rosh Yeshiva who was traveling to raise funds for his yeshiva. And at one place, he comes to a wealthy man and he asks him for money. He shows him pictures of the students, the yeshiva boys who are learning. And the donor, the man, is very impressed. And he says, okay, I have a certain amount of money here, but I want to give you more than I was thinking to give you. Let me go to the other room, to my safe, and I'll bring you out some more money. So Rabbi says, okay, go for it. Wonderful. He's excited. He's getting a big donation. While you go, do you mind if I take a peek in one of your Gemaras? He's in an office. He's got all kinds of books on the shelves. Can I use a Gemara and learn a little bit? And he says, yeah, of course, go for it. So he comes back and the wealthy man takes one look at the rabbi and his face turns red and he gets so upset and he says, forget it. I changed my mind. I'm not giving you a penny. I thought you were actually who you are claiming to be. You're this big Rosh Yeshiva, but now I see it's all a lie. You call yourself a Rosh Yeshiva. You don't even know how to open a Gemara. And he pointed at his Gemara that he's learning. Okay, let's say there's a Gemara. He was holding it like this, upside down. The Rosh Yeshiva was holding it upside down. And the donor said, you're obviously not a Rosh Yeshiva. So he was gonna throw him out. And the Yeshiva corrected him. And he said, when he was growing up, he lived in Yemen. And there were no books in Yemen. There was no Gemaras in Yemen. There was a very hot commodity to find Jewish books to learn from. He used to learn in a group with 3 other students. And their teacher had one copy of the book and they would sit around the table. And each of those students would be reading from another side. And he said, my seat was directly opposite from that rabbi. So for years and years and years, the only way I could read from a Gemara was upside down. And that's how my brain learned to read Aramaic, Hebrew, Aramaic. And that's why until this very day, I can't read right side up and I use the Gemara upside down. And that's how I read from it upside down. Now, how crazy is that? How wild would this donor have had to be to judge this rabbi favorably? Would you have thought of that? Would you have thought of that? Oh, this guy probably grew up in Yemen and he was Moser Nefesh, so dedicated to learn how to, to learn a little bit of Gemara. There's no way we would think of that, right? So that's what the Panovich Rav is saying. We need to be very, very innovative in how to be dana chaschas and how this is ultimately something that might not be as bad as it looks. And I think, I want to get a little sidetracked here. The same thing applies to how we relate to Hashem and how innovative we might need to be to have emunah in Hashem. And I want to tell you a story that this just triggered in my mind that happened to me this week. And I don't really know what the ending of the story is going to be. It's still ongoing, but I think there's such a strong lesson to be learned here. So I was driving this week, just the other day on Sunday, we were going to the zoo with my family. And while I'm driving, my engine starts shaking, like the car starts shaking and all the warning lights go on. And I, broke down on the side of the road. I was able to pull off the highway and I had to get towed. Car wasn't working. And the car got towed to a mechanic. And the mechanic calls me up and the mechanic says, I don't have good news for you. Your engine is done. Totally done. Okay. Now an engine on that car, he said, is not going to be anything less than $6,000. And this is a mechanic I trust. I guess I should mention. I've used him, unfortunately, I've had to use mechanics in the past over here in Jacksonville, and I trust him. So I was really, really bummed out about this. I cannot just whip out $6,000 to put into my car. That is a lot of money. And over Sunday and parts of Monday, I was just kind of bummed out. I don't know how else to say it. I couldn't really think of how this has a happy ending. So in my mind, the only way this has a happy ending is that I buy a scratch off and I win $6,000, because there's no doubt that this engine needs to be replaced. Like I said, I trust this guy, and that's what he says, and that's it. That's what has to be done. So I have a friend of mine here who was trying to like encourage me, and he said, you got to have a little emunah. You have to have a little faith in Hashem that he could do something. Okay, I should have faith that Hashem's going to drop $6,000 on my front porch. I just don't really feel it ending well. I don't really know how it could possibly end well. And he didn't have any suggestions either, by the way. He was just saying you got to have more emunah than that. I get a call back from the mechanic the next day, and he says, I tried, anything I could on your engine. There's nothing to do, but you do have a chance at walking away from this without paying a single penny. And he tells me that in 2021, if I remember correctly, there was a class action lawsuit brought against Kia for several different types of cars of various years that had engine issues. And the settlement was a $1.3 billion settlement where Kia had to pay all of the claimants here to replace their engines. There was whatever the issue was. And as part of the settlement, they are required to offer a lifetime warranty on every single one of these cars of these years that was ever sold. And a 2017 Kia Sorento, which is what I have, is in the year and make and model of that type of car. So he said, call Kia and ask them if it'll be covered. So I called Kia today, and they said, you're right, it is covered, but we need to take it, we need to put it through some inspection and blah, blah, blah. And I don't know what needs to be done. And I can't tell you now, that I for sure qualify for it. They couldn't tell me either. They said we need to run certain tests, but the short answer is it looks like it is covered as long as certain criteria are there, which I don't know if I fill. But that's not the point. That's not the point. I'm not sharing this as like a story with a happy ending and everything's wonderful. I don't know. Maybe next week I'll come back and I'll say I'm opening a GoFundMe page and I'm trying to raise $6,000 for my engine. It could be. I don't know how the story is going to end, but I do know that my eye was opened in the fact that I need to be more innovative in how I think of how Hashem could take care of me. I was so narrow-minded. It was just like, okay, I got to win the lottery. It's the only way out of this. And Hashem sent me a message, regardless of what the end of the story is, that Hashem can do anything. And it does not have to be that. And by the way, I went back to this guy who told me to have emunah. And I said, okay, you want me to have emunah? Can you think of ways that I walk out of this without paying a dime? And he actually couldn't think of any. He's like, oh, okay, maybe the dealer just got in another, a totaled Kia Sorento or something, but the engine still works, and he'll sell it to you for $1,000 instead of $6,000. I said, no, free. Like, I don't know, he got an auction or a whatever, a few $100s. He could not think of a way that was $0.00. But that's the idea. We have to be innovative. We have to use we have to broaden our minds as to how Hashem could help us. So that's got a little sidetracked there, but that's a lesson I learned this week. And I think when it comes to how we relate to each other as well, we want to be innovative in how we judge others favorably. Okay, any thoughts on that? Or anybody know a better mechanic?
No, I think those are great points, Rabbi. Actually, I was listening to a tape or something tonight too about how we are supposed to open up and seek funds in a normal, rational way, but then Hashem turns around and can do something so miraculous. We just have to be open to it, like you say, beyond the box, thinking outside the box. So
right, exactly.
It's hard to do because we think we're still in control of it, or we're supposed to be in control of it. But it's really wonderful to hear that was even a possibility, and please God that should happen. So
right.
So if not, we'll go for the GoFundMe. That's a great idea.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay, so another story I wanted to share. I had a couple stories tonight. is I read this story and I thought it was pretty, I don't know, I had a couple different takeaways. I wonder if, you guys can share with me what your takeaway is. So here's the story. The story goes of the town of Bardichev in Ukraine. There was a big famous Rebbe known as the Bardichev Rebbe, also known as the Kedushas Levi, because he wrote a book called Kedushas Levi, one of the most classic, legendary Hasidic books that there is out there. And he was known for being an unbelievable role model for this concept of B'tzedek Tishpat Amisecha, of Havidanas Kala Adam L'chaf Schus, for judging people favorably. He had the craziest ways. You want to talk about Krummer Svaris, twisted logic, ways to see the positive in every Jew? Like, one of the famous stories about him is he's walking on Yom Kippur, or some say it was Shabbos, in his town, and he sees a Jew smoking a cigarette. And he asks the Jew, he says, Rabbi Yid, you must not realize that it's Yom Kippur. And the Jew says, no, I know it's Yom Kippur. He says, oh, well, you must not realize that it's forbidden to smoke on Yom Kippur. And the Jew says, no, I know it's forbidden to smoke on Yom Kippur. He says, oh, you must not really realize that you're smoking. Maybe you're just like busy walking and it's just out of habit and you're not really, conscious about what you're doing. It's like, no, I know exactly what I'm doing, and I know it's Yom Kippur, and I know it's forbidden to smoke on Yom Kippur. How do you judge that person favorably? And the Bardichever looks up at Shemayim and he says, Hashem, look at your children. I gave him 3 opportunities to lie, and he didn't lie once. He will only say emes. What a way of viewing the positive in an interaction. So the story goes about him that in the town of Bardichev, it was a town of, the core neighborhood of the like Jewish neighborhood lived near the shul and also their Rebbe's house, the Kedushas Levi, the Bardichever's house. So it was the first night of Slichos, which is coming up soon. So, a week or so before Rosh Hashanah, and some people have a custom to do Slichos that night at midnight. I think that's what they do in Jacksonville locally as well. And some people do it in the morning or they do it extra early. So here in Bardichev, the custom was to do it very early in the morning. So it's 5 o'clock in the morning. And the custom of the city is that everybody walks to the house of their Rebbe, and then they accompany the Rebbe to shul for slichos. Nobody's sleeping late. Everybody, understands that Rosh Hashanah is coming and Yom Kippur is coming and slichos is the time to do teshuvah, and how serious this time is. And the crowd, approaches the house of the Rebbe, and the Rebbe comes outside, and what's he holding in his hand? He's holding a bottle of vodka in one hand, and in the other hand, he's holding a basket, and in the basket is herring and kichel, herring and crackers. They're wondering, what an inappropriate time, right, for vodka and herring and crackers. Now, I don't know that they're wondering that. I'm wondering that. They probably had more faith in their Rebbe that he knows exactly what he's doing. And he says, okay, let's go. And he starts walking and they follow him, but he doesn't go to shul. He passes right by shul and he walks to the outskirts of the city and he comes to a little bed and breakfast bar kind of place. And he walks inside and the sight to be seen is there's a bunch of passed out drunks on the floor, empty bottles of alcohol everywhere. And he looks around and he finds one of these passed out people on the floor. There's tzitzis coming out of his shirt. He's a Jew. So he wakes him up, shakes his shoulder, and he says, Rabbi Yid, wake up. I have vodka for you and herring and crackers. And the Jew looks up at him, and I guess he doesn't know who the Rebbe is. Maybe he's not, such a connected Jew. I'm not sure exactly, but he doesn't recognize who he is. He says, I don't know who you are, but you're crazy if you think I'm going to eat and drink before I daven, before I pray. And then he says, okay, he goes on tonight. He sees a kippah. He wakes up the next person. He says, I want to give you some vodka, some herring and crackers. Same idea. You crazy? You think I'm going to wake up and the first thing I'm going to do is that? I got to pray. I have to pray Shachris. And then he goes to the innkeeper, to the bartender, to the non-Jews in the room who are also passed out with the whole party. And he wakes them up and he says, here, I have some vodka, some herring, some crackers. They grab it, take a drink, eat some herring, roll over, go back to sleep. They're loving it. They're loving it. And the Berditchever says, now we're ready to go daven slichos. And he looks up to Hashem and he says, look, Hashem, even the passed out drunks on the outskirts of town in the bar are not going to eat before they daven shachars. What an unbelievable merit for the Jewish people. And with that, he's ready. After he's demonstrated the beauty of the Jewish people, he's ready to go daven. So I think there's a lot of takeaways from this. I mean, first of all, the Berditchever didn't see these people as terrible people. He was focusing only on the fact that they wouldn't eat or drink before shachars. The fact that they're passed out drunk on the floor in a bar is just not something he's looking at, because he was looking for the positive in every Jew. And of course, another angle to this story that is mind-blowing is to think that the drunkards of the city are wearing tzitzis and a kippah and won't eat or drink before they pray in the morning. I mean, that's mind-blowing to me. If only that was that was the worst of the worst. It's like the most disconnected Jew will not eat before shachars, or will eat before shachars. If only that was the struggle. What a different era, what a different generation. But the Berditchever only looked at the positive in that. And I was thinking to myself, what was his game plan that morning? Okay, you're the Berditchever Rebbe. Pretend for a second you're the Rebbe. It's 4:30 in the morning, Slichas morning. You walk outside your house with vodka and herring and crackers. You're going to this inn, to this bed and breakfast, whatever, and you're going to be putting this test forward in front of the whole city. Imagine that it turned out differently. Imagine you wake up the first guy who's wearing a yarmulke and says this, and you say, do you want some vodka? And he says, oh yeah, I do, and takes a swig from the bottle and starts eating herring and crackers. How did he know that it would end this way? How in the world did he know that it would end this way? It makes no sense to me. I don't have an answer to this, but it's clear that the Berditchever felt it through and through. We were saying before, right, that who did we quote from? I don't remember who we quoted from, that it shouldn't be, Rabbi Menashe Uhr, right? I said from Menashe Uhr that it should be real. It shouldn't be just like this fake thing that you're saying, yeah, he's probably not doing anything wrong. And deep down, you're like, yeah, of course he's doing something wrong. The Kedushas Levi didn't feel that way. He was willing to put, almost his own reputation, so to speak, on the line by going through this whole show, because he truly felt that the Jew would come through and do the mitzvah and not be lax in one area, even though eating before Shacharis is not like the worst of Averis out there. There's many worse things to do in Judaism than eating and drinking before Shacharis. Maybe that's why they actually did it. Maybe because he had such faith in them that somehow had some kind of, maybe not conscious, maybe some conscious effect on their neshama that they did that. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm totally speculating here. I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure what it is, but it sets the bar. That's what I think. I think this sets the bar in what we can do. We can be creative. We can try to judge favorably, and don't just try to convince ourselves in a external way. Let it be something we truly believe through and through, that what our brothers and sisters are doing are good and they mean well, and let's focus on those aspects of them. Okay, that's it for today. Any thoughts, questions, comments on any of this?
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, everyone.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Yes, Shakor. Rabbi, you should write a book. You should definitely start writing a book. Your stories are so captivating and so apropos. Really beautiful.
I wanted to mention, if you're still on here, just there's two upcoming things I'm doing. First of all, I'm officially going to be doing the Shabbos class in Eitz Chaim every week now. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
What time? What time would it be?
10:15.
Oh, we got to get to
10:15
shul
every
on
week.
time now. That's great. And also you're doing Thursday, right? You're doing the lunch and learn.
Yes, and that's the second thing is Lunch and Learns, and I'm doing one next week, Thursday, September 15th. Hopefully, if you're on this call, you're on Eitz Chaim or Kollel marketing of any type, and you'll get all this information. And if not, reach out to me.
Nice.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank
good
you
one. Have a
so
good week.
much. Have a
Shabbat tov.
great week.
Thank
bye.
you.